Act and the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, and describe the provisions of the Florida Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. Let me go backwards a little bit. How many of you are landlords? You have something that you rent out there? Just one of you? That's it? Okay. Did you know that even if you're a private individual that owns your own property, that you can, and you rent, did you know that you have to keep all advance rents and deposits in a separate account, and you can't use the money? And you have to tell your customer, your tenant, within 30 days where that money is, including a letter saying that it's held on the Bank of America.
But they don't do that, never.
That's what I'm getting at.
Never seen it.
They're required by. The problem is, and I think it's a big problem with the state of Florida, really, that, you know, once somebody buys a property, there ought to be some things that they have to do. And maybe it is the state's requirement that once they file a deed, they send you all this information that you're required to do, because frankly, there's no government agency that tells a private individual once they own what, if any, rules they have to abide by. And we're not cops, and we don't have time for this, and we're not required to. So you sell a 4-unit or a 5-unit apartment building to a customer, and they close, and voila. They have no idea that that's one of the basic things. Did you also know that if you have more than a duplex, you have to provide roach control? Did you know that whether it's 1 unit or how many units, down here, air conditioning is not a requirement, but heat is. Did you know that you have to provide heat?
Yes.
Because that's under FHA rules. But these things are requirements of the state law, but they don't, and we're supposed to know because we're tested on it, not that we'll ever use it again in our lives. But a private citizen, not a real estate broker or sales associate, who's licensed, who read through the book, they don't even tell you, hey, you're now the owner here. Make it very simple. You're now the owner. You are required to abide by Chapter 83 of the Florida statutes. They don't even say that. So people do whatever they want to. They go out there and change locks because somebody didn't pay their rent, which obviously you're not allowed to. They cut off water, or you know, because you didn't pay the rent.
That right there is major.
It is major, but people do it.
Mm-hmm.
Or they'll basically say something like, you need to move out now. You got 10 days to move out, or I'm going to kick you out. And you know what you're doing, and you say, I have a lease. I don't care. Move out. Or, I don't care. Your rent is double next month. And you know what? The tenants don't know any better. And they panic and they pay. If they can. If not, they move out. So nobody tells them their rights. Nobody tells the owners what they can or cannot do. Something like simply, you can't walk in to my unit because you want to. You need to notify me first. Law says you have to give me at least 4 hours, unless it's an emergency. If something's burning, use your master key, break the lock, do whatever you have to go in. But there's no law that basically, or there's no agency that kind of helps out on these things. We, on the other hand, and I said we are held by a high authority, remember? We have to abide by all of these things. And one of the first basic things that we have to do is we have to not discriminate. The Civil Rights of 1866 prohibits discrimination based on race in all real estate transactions. There are no exceptions. And Jones, Vincent, Bayers, and the Supreme Court decision basically agreed, or agreed that that was the requirement. Therefore, it's still the law today. It was the Civil Rights Act of 1866, but a Supreme Court decision basically reestablished that. It's still the law today. They have, however, that was back in 1866, they have changed it a couple of times to add a couple more things to it. For instance, In 1964, they ended racial segregation in schools, workplaces, and public accommodations. They also prohibited discrimination and added some more definition based on race, color, religion, or national origin when it came to public accommodations in hotels and restaurants, gas stations, places of entertainment, and public facilities such as government-run facilities. And then came the Fair Housing Act, which in 1968, which basically said that discrimination is illegal in the sales, leasing, advertising, sales of or rentals, financing, or brokerage services if it's based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. In 1988, they added handicap, mental or physical, and familial status. Now, what does that tell you? You're going to get a listing to sales of a property, and somebody undoubtedly you're going to get across this one time, at least one time in your life, if not more. Somebody's going to say, I don't want you to sell to Haitians, or I don't want you to sell to Hispanics, or I don't want anybody here from that side of the street. You can't do that. But you know what? The problem is, we're not the problem. The problem is that they, let's just say, give them the benefit of the doubt, they just don't know any better. Nobody's told them that they're not allowed to do that. Nobody told them when they bought the property that these are the things that you have to abide by. Okay? So that's the best case scenario. You know, assume that they don't know any better. So you have to, remember what some of the things that we have to do as part of the services, we have to be counselors. Sometimes we have to counsel people. Okay? We have to counsel people on their behavior because in order to be fair, they just don't know any better. Fresh corn. Familiar status. What does that mean?
Divorce, single, together.
No, when it comes to violating somebody's rights under familiar status, what are we talking about?
Probably something you know.
Pregnant women and families with children under the age of 18.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a group that are exempt from that.
There's a what, sir?
There is a type of community that is exempt from that one.
Which is that?
All people.
65 and older.
Oh, don't go there. Don't go there.
They're exempt from that one.
No, they're not. You're not exempt from violating anybody's civil rights in any shape or form. No. There are two types of communities that can, and only if, and read it on 147, starting on line 35. It says certain housing for older persons is exempt from the familial status protection under the Fair Housing Act, provided that all units are occupied by persons 62 years of age or older, or at least 80% of the units are occupied by one or more persons 55 or over, and housing policies are published and followed that demonstrate the intent to be housing for 55 and over. Here's what happens. Let's say anybody familiar with Pembroke Pines?
Century Village.
Century Village, Cemetery Village. Okay. Century Village, for instance, for people under the age of 18, they won't let them in their buses, no matter if they're going with an adult. They won't let them in any of the recreational areas, and especially not in the recreational building. When you buy, one of the owners has to be at least 55 years of age. And if you rent, still one of the tenants has to be at least 55 years of age. And then they have to maintain this, and they can violate a little bit. They can maintain this as long as they have more than 80% of the total units qualify as this. But even if you're in that 20%, you still cannot go into any of the public areas. Now, as long as you don't make a federal case out of one person, and you treat everybody the same, you're allowed to do this.
Right.
Okay, and it tells you right at the very beginning, before you buy, before you rent, before anything, these are the rules that we live by in here. And if you rent here, you have to abide by these rules. Let me tell you something. If you have a pregnant woman that actually got pregnant after she was living there, which may happen because 20% of the people can be over the age of 18, but less than 55. Their children will still not be able to ride any of their buses or visit any of their recreation areas.
Wow.
And it's normal, that's the way it is. So it's not a violation of civil rights if they comply like this. Otherwise, in total, you can't treat anybody any different. And you have to treat everybody the same. So this is some of the way that people do this. You know, they rent something and they don't want children. They're not stupid enough if they know the law. They're not stupid enough to say, well, I'm not renting to kids. Although you do have the right as an owner to protect your property. But what you do is, okay, we're showing the place today and tomorrow. Fill out an application and we'll let you know. They'll know whoever they want in. They didn't violate your rights because they didn't tell you you're not allowed here because you have kids. Or I see a belly on you, therefore forget it. You're going to have one. You know? Race. Now that, obviously, and you have owners that will tell you, hey, I don't want to rent to somebody from, or don't show it to anybody from. You know what? At that point, you need to educate your customer, your client. And if you cannot educate your customer or client, my recommendation to you is walk away. The deal's not worth it. Let them hire somebody else. You got a question? No? Your hand is hiding from this piece of wall here, so I can't tell.
No, I'm not raising my hand.
Okay. Sex. It's not a yes or no answer. It's male or female answer. Okay? You cannot violate somebody's rights or handicap status. Now, what's handicap? Color. What's handicap?
Impaired somehow.
Well,
Impaired
we
somehow.
did read that it could be mental capacity, incapacity. That's still handicap. Somebody with AIDS is a handicap. Religion. National origin. So don't sell to anybody from that coast or that other part of the world. Families with children under the age of 18 and pregnant women. That's under the familiar status. Boy, I'm glad I wasn't wrong. I just remembered that from 4 years ago. Because I said it without looking at the book.
Oh, the children.
It sort of keeps on your head, you know, it doesn't go away. Handicap status is any physical or mental impairment that interferes with normal life functioning. So, somebody with an ADD, does that interfere with normal life functions?
Yes.
You'll say no.
It hints your life.
It enhances your life, right? But we're not supposed to treat somebody different just because they have. No protection under the Fair Housing Act is based on age and occupation and marital status and sexual orientation. Now, what is the housing covered by the Fair Housing Act? Single family. government-owned housing, the licensee is employed to sell or rent property, and property owned by a person who owns 4 or more residential units. Now, it says single family. It goes on to say who owns 4 or more units. So that kind of takes everything in residential, doesn't it? Because even if it's 28-unit apartment building, it says a property owned by a person who owns 4 or more residential units. That's commercial. Well, not 4 or more, but 5 or more.